Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. Today is day 14 of AWS Zero to Hero series, and in this video I will explain you how to implement continuous integration pipeline on the AWS platform using managed AWS services. So this is going to be a fully practical video, a step-by-step tutorial that you can also follow by watching the video. All that you need to do is to just follow the notes that I'm going to share and follow the video that I'm going to do. In this video, we will use AWS code pipeline. We will use AWS code build. And instead of code commit, I will explain you using GitHub because GitHub needs additional configuration. And also GitHub is the one that is most widely used. So we will use GitHub, AWS code pipeline and AWS code build to integrate and create an CI/CD pipeline. Sorry, just the CI pipeline. CD will be covered tomorrow. So today's video is only about continuous integration. So watch the video till the end so that you can also perform the practicals. So for the purpose of video, first of all, I have created this GitHub repository. I think people who are watching these videos already know that there is a GitHub repository called AWS DevOps Zero to Hero. If you go to the repository, there will be a folder with today's name, that is day 14, and inside which I have a simple Python application. This is a Flask based Python application, and there is a README which explains everything that I'm going to do today. And this is explained in the most elaborated way as much as possible so that you can also follow the notes. However, even if you watch the video, you don't have to read the notes. You can implement by watching the video as well. So the simple Python application, it has a very basic Flask code that's as simple as a hello world application. So even if it is a complicated application, the steps will not change. So I have the Flask application and then I have requirements.txt file that you usually have for a Python application. And the only requirement is Flask because it's a very simple Flask application. And then I'll also show in this video how to create Docker image and how to push this Docker image to Docker Hub. So that's why I have written a Python related Docker file as well. And this is again a very, very basic Docker file where I am using Python based image. I have created a workspace. I'm copying the requirements.txt into this one because you need to install all the requirements in the Docker file or the Docker image that is going to be created. And finally, I'm copying the Flask related source code, exposing the required port. And in the command, that is the Docker command, I am just starting the Flask application. So this is a very basic Docker file. And let's say you are not aware of Docker. And if you are willing to learn Docker, there is a dedicated Docker playlist on my channel. You can go and understand the concept of containers right from scratch, right from basics till the point of multi-stage Docker builds, distroless Docker images, and Docker networking and volumes as well. So it's a very elaborated playlist. If you want to learn Docker, you can learn from there. And then there is this buildspec.yaml. Of course, I will not be using this buildspec.yaml because I want to show you the buildspec.yaml step by step. So I am going to write this buildspec.yaml, right? I have just created it here for the purpose of your reference, but we will do it practically in today's video because today's video is all about continuous integration and building the application. So I hope these files are clear. If they are not clear, then you can go through these files and understand exactly what each and every step is doing. So you can pause the video here, go back to the GitHub repository and understand the files, but they are very, very basic ones. Now let's go to our AWS account. And let me tell you, even I am doing this here along with you, and there can be issues. If there are issues, you can watch along with me how I am solving the issues. So the very first thing, if we go back to the diagram, right? So let me show you the diagram one more time. So this is what we are going to implement. And as part of this implementation, what we will do is firstly, we will write the AWS code build. You can start from here as well. You can start from here as well. but we have already created the GitHub repository with all the code and everything. So let's start with the code build. Because if you start with the code build, you will first be able to build your project with all the steps. That is the code checkout, unit testing, then image building, image scanning I did not include, but it's just a one step, and then image push. So you will understand about the building part of your application. Then what you can do basically is we will go with creating the pipeline, which is basically an orchestrator, right? So let's start with AWS code build. So if we go back, this is the AWS console. Let me switch to AWS code build. And I am using the root account here. But like I always say, it is preferable to use the IAM account because I am using a demo AWS account, and I will delete everything that I've created after this. So I am using the root account. But if you want to use IAM, then create an IAM user and grant the required permissions. Perfect. So firstly, let's start with create build project. It's going to be a step-by-step tutorial like I promised you. So watch carefully. Firstly, provide the name of the project, right? So what is the name of the project here? You can give any name. Let me call this as sample Python project. Provide description. In organization, you will provide the name of your project. Let's say you're working for Amazon payments team, right? So you can provide it as Amazon payment service. And in this case, I'm just building a sample one. So let me call it as sample Python Flask service. You can provide the same description as well, a sample Python Flask service. So then you will go with these options here. You don't have to enable. Basically, this says that let's say there is a developer who pulls multiple commits to the GitHub repository or AWS code commit. So in such cases, you want to restrict any number of concurrent builds? That means if 100 developers are triggering code changes, do you want to run 100 pipelines at once, or do you want to restrict the number of pipelines that want to run at once? So you don't have to restrict anything, right? And then we will move to the primary thing, that is what is the code commit repository that you want to use. In our case, we want to use GitHub. These are the supported ones. It supports GitHub, Bitbucket, GitHub Enterprise, AWS Code Commit, and S3 buckets. If you want to use any other version control systems, let's say I want to use GitLab, or let's say I want to use any other version control system, then what you need to do is you need to basically create mirroring of that version control system onto any of these platforms. That means you have to mirror the code from those GitLab or any other enterprise solutions that you have to S3 buckets or any other platforms that are supported here. Mirroring is nothing but you create a copy and that copy parallelly gets updated. Perfect. Do you want to use a public repository, or do you want to use repository in your GitHub account? So you can choose any of these things. Let's say if you are using my repository, let's say you're doing the same demo, you're using this same repository and building the same application, then you can select this option as public repository. If you want to create your own Python application in your own GitHub repository, then you can provide the details of your GitHub repository, of your GitHub account, right? So in my case, I can use the public repository itself. And what is the path of this public repository? Just copy it from here. Name of the repository is AWS 0 to Hero. Within AWS 0 to Hero, I have a folder for the code. So my repository will be AWS 0 to Hero. Like again, I'm telling you, if you want to use your own repository, all that you need to do is provide your GitHub account details here, and you need to connect to the GitHub. So I have already connected to GitHub. It is just, let me disconnect and show you. So let's say if you want to use your own GitHub, if you are not connected, it will look like this in your case, where it will ask you connect with OAuth or connect with GitHub personal access token. Select connect with OAuth, click on connect to GitHub, and then you will see a pop-up like this. Okay. So you need to confirm. You need to firstly select your GitHub account, and then you need to click on the confirm button, right? Once you click on the confirm button, then your GitHub OAuth will be enabled. There is some issue here. It's taking time. Okay, I think there was some issue. After 3 to 4 attempts, the confirm button got enabled. Now you will see this page, right? Once you connect to GitHub, you will see this page where select either public repository or repository from your GitHub account. So anything is fine. I can choose any of these things, and let me provide these details one more time. So this is my GitHub username, and this is the repository name. If you want to follow the same thing, you can also provide the same things here. GitHub connection is already done. Now you don't have to select any of these options. Move to this section where AWS is asking like, okay, what is the environment that you want to use? Now, what does this mean, right? So if you look at this diagram one more time, what did I tell you in the last class? AWS pipeline, AWS code pipeline basically acts as a orchestrator which invokes AWS code build. This is what I've explained to you in the last class. What does pipeline do? Code pipeline, it invokes the code build service. Whereas if you are using orchestrators like Jenkins, then Jenkins will entirely take care of the continuous integration process. It will take care of the build process. Whereas AWS code pipeline, it will invoke other services. In this case, it can invoke AWS code build, or it can also invoke Jenkins build as well. So that's why now you have to provide this environment for the AWS code build. What would be the environment here? So the environment that we are looking for would be a virtual machine image or a Docker image. So AWS offers a preset of these managed images. Do you want to use Amazon Linux? Do you want to use Ubuntu, or do you want to use Windows Server? So let me use Ubuntu because most of the people will understand it easily. And within Ubuntu, there are runtimes. Choose the standard runtime, and in the image you can choose the latest image. So this is the environment that AWS is providing you. You don't have to create anything like when you are using Jenkins. What you usually do is you create worker nodes, and on top of the worker nodes you install some operating system, or you create an EC2 instance as a worker node, and you say Jenkins that run the Jenkins pipelines on this environment, right? Let's say you are using 2 worker nodes. So you will tell Jenkins that, okay, use one of these worker nodes and execute the pipeline. Now, in the same way, when you are using AWS code pipeline, right, you will use AWS code build as a build service. And within AWS code build, because it is a managed service, AWS will provide you ready-made images, and you can run your code build on those images. So what I've done here is I have chosen Ubuntu as my operating system for that image. And here for Ubuntu, you have 3 options for the images. You can always go with the latest one. Perfect environment for the image would be Linux. Now here comes the thing. Do you want to create a new service role, or do you want to use an existing service role? What is a role here? If you go back to the AWS Day 2 course that I have taught you, I told you that there will be IAM users and there will be IAM roles. Do you remember? When we learned about IAM, we learned that there is IAM users and then there is IAM policies. IAM users is for people like us. Now, for me to log into this AWS account, I either need root account or I either need AWS IAM user. And my AWS IAM user will have permissions to access services. Whereas AWS code build is a service, but it's not a user. Now for AWS, this specific code build, to perform actions on AWS, it will need a service role or an IAM role. This is what I explained on day 2 as well. And I told you when you get to it, you will understand. So here we are using an IAM role. Why are we using a role and why not as IAM user? Because this is a service that is performing some action. It's not a user that is performing action. So that's why we use a service role, or we use an IAM role here. And right now this IAM role will not have much access. And when we use some resources during this continuous integration, I'll show you how to grant permissions to this IAM role as well, because we will deal with some sensitive information. So I will use AWS Systems Manager in this video, and I'll show you how to grant this AWS code build permissions to AWS Systems Manager. Perfect. Now this is the main part, that is the build specifications file. So the build specifications file, you can consider it as same as something that you write in GitHub Actions or something that you write in Jenkins pipelines. So for all these stages to execute, what you will do is basically you will write some code, right? You need to write code for checking out the code. You need to write code for image creation. You need to write code for image scanning. And that thing you will write in the AWS build specs file, right? So either you can use this build spec file from the GitHub repository like we use in Jenkins, or you can also write it here. Sorry, you can also write it here. So you can use this switch to editor and you can start writing here, and AWS will help you, right? So this is why I wanted to show you from here instead of using or putting this build spec file in the GitHub. I want to write it here and explain you how does this build spec file is written. If you know any CI solution, most of these CI related files are common, right? Most of the files that you see are using the YAML syntaxing, or they use some kind of templating language, and you only need to know about what needs to be done in the continuous integration. Syntaxes are available everywhere. You can Google them, you can use ChatGPT, or if you are using this managed services, they also provide you bunch of examples. For example, here if you see this one, here AWS is technically telling you what all the options that are available. It has commented out all the options, and whichever you want to use, you can simply uncomment, right? Let's say I want to use environment variables. Just uncomment this one and add the environment variables. Okay. Let's say I want to use artifacts. You can just uncomment this one and use it. So writing an AWS code build pipeline or code build spec is very, very simple. You don't have to put a lot of effort, but I'm going to show you anyways. So firstly, what are we going to do? If you understand that writing this file is a very simple thing. So let's start with the phases stage instead of starting with the environment variables or sensitive information, because I'll tell you about the sensitive information later. Firstly, my focus is to explain you the install phase. So firstly, uncomment the install. What do you want to do in the install? You want to select what kind of runtime you need, right? What is the first step? What is the runtime that you require? In my case, the runtime is Python, right? So what I'll do is I will add Python here. So just select the name as Python, version as 3.11, and uncomment this one. That's it. Now, one step is already done. You have an Ubuntu image with Python runtime that is available for your building. And because why did I select Python? Because the application that I have written is Python. If the application that you have written is Java, you need to go and select Java there. I mean, you need to update Java here. If the application that you're writing is Go language, you need to select Go here. And then do you have any commands, right? So in my case, I don't have any commands in the runtime stage. So let me ignore. Then do you have any pre-built actions? What are pre-built actions? Like when we're learning about GitHub Actions, when we are learning in Jenkins, I told you that sometimes you have things to do even before building your application. In this case, even before building my application, I have to install Flask on the virtual machine, right? Or I have to install Flask on the image where I'm building this application. So this will be my prerequisite, or this will be my pre-build stage where I'll uncomment this one and let me remove one, and let me say here pip install -r requirements .txt, right? And let me uncomment this one. But one thing is, in my case, I did not put this source code at the root level, right? So if the source code was here, let's say, instead of creating all these folders, if I have put the source code directly here, then I this command will work fine because requirements.txt file would be available somewhere here. But if you see here, I put the requirements.txt inside this folder and inside the sample Python app. So I have to provide the absolute path. That is day 14. Inside the day 14, I have another folder called sample Python app. And inside that, I have this requirements.txt, right? This is the entire pre-built command. What it will do, it will basically install Flask on the image that we are using. Perfect. Now it sounds good. Now let's go to the build stage. Now what I want to do as part of the build stage is, let's go back to the diagram. What we are doing firstly, we are checking out the image. Firstly, we are checking out the code. But in this case, the checkout of code will happen automatically because you have already integrated the, here if you see, you have already integrated the GitHub repository. So the GitHub repository code checkout will be taken care automatically. So you can skip the step 1. Then the step 2 is to build the application, build the Docker image and push the Docker image. I'm not doing Docker scan, but I can also do. It's just one command. You can just say Docker scan. I'll show it later. Okay. So firstly, let's run the build stage, Docker image stage and Docker push stage. So for that, what I'll do is, again, I'll go back here and in the build command stage, I have uncommented those things and let me add the commands. Sorry, I missed the hyphen here. Yep. Now what I'll do firstly is to switch the directory because I have to move to this folder, right? By default, it will not be in this folder. Perfect. Day 14, sample Python app. I'm repeating one more time. If you are not following this exact repository and if you're trying it by yourself, then make sure you provide the right path. Let's say you haven't created these folders, then you don't need all of these things. Okay. So I have cd to the folder. Now let's add an echo statement saying that building Docker image. Perfect. Then the next command in my case would be to run the Docker related commands, right? What I would like to do is I want to use Docker build, right? I want to build this Docker file that is available. Where is the Docker file? Docker file is available at the root of the repository. And what this Docker file is doing, it is basically building the Python application and it is executing the Python application. So everything is done in the Docker file. Now all that I need to do is I need to run this command called Docker build -t followed by the, what would be the image tag. So I'll explain you right now. Let me not put the image tag because for the image tag and for the Docker username and all, you need to keep them sensitively. You should not directly update them here, but we will use the AWS Systems Manager and store our credentials in the AWS Systems Manager. Like when we use Jenkins, we store them in the Jenkins credential store. When we use GitHub, we store them in the GitHub CI/CD secrets, or we use some external tools like HashiCorp Vault, right? Similarly, for AWS, you have something called as AWS Systems Manager, and I'll show you where exactly you have to put them. Let's say if you put the password and username directly here, what will happen? Anyone who opens this file, they can see your username and password and they can use your username and password, which is compromising the security. So that's why let me not put the username and password for now. And let me say this is the Docker build command. And then you have one more command for Docker push. So these commands are right now incomplete and I intentionally did not complete them because I want to show you the AWS Systems Manager, how to secure them. Then do you have any post build actions? Right now, post build actions can be, because we are not implementing the continuous delivery, we are only doing continuous integration in this video. So I'll just add a echo statement. So I'll just add a print statement saying that inside the commands, I'll just say echo build is successful. This is all I have for the CI stage. Let's not complicate any further, because these things we will take a look at tomorrow's video where we will be doing the continuous delivery. But right now I just have this one. So let me eliminate all the other things except for the parameter store, because I am going to use the parameter store, and I'll show you how to use AWS Systems Manager and parameter store. Why are we using this parameter store? Basically to provide all this sensitive information in a secret location. So let me keep this as is and move ahead with the configuration. Now all that you need to do is click on the create build project. Just a second. I haven't provided the role. Oh, okay. So let's use an existing service. Why is it not showing the new service role? Create a service role in your account. Ideally, it should show here a service role. For some reason, it is missing. That's okay. I will use an existing service role in my account. If you don't have a service role, I'll show you how to create that as well. You just need to go here. I can show you right now itself. Just go to your AWS. Okay. Go to your AWS console. Right? And what we will do is we will go to the IAM section. So in IAM, you have something called as roles, right? So go to the roles section. And here you have an option for creation of role. So you can create IAM roles like this, where you provide what service is using this role, right? So here, what is the service that is using this specific role? We want to use it for AWS build service, right? So to use it for the AWS build service, what you need to do is search the code build here. Let me say code build. Perfect. So we are using this service for AWS code build. So allow code build to call AWS services on your behalf. And then you can click on the next button. Here you can grant any permissions that is required. So right now you can grant the permissions, or you can just click on the next button and you can grant them whenever it is required, right? So right now, when you're watching this video, you don't know what is required. So just provide the name role, code build service role, Abhi, and let me go and create the role. Because we are doing it for the first time, let's say we don't know what permissions are required. Now I'll use the same code role. Ideally, it should also allow you to select creation of role directly here, but somehow it's not doing. That's okay. I have created the role. Code build F service role. I have to refresh this page to reflect that service role that I've created. So I've used an existing one. In your case, I've shown you exactly how to do. So you can do the same way and you can put that role ARN here. If the role ARN does not show up, what you will do is basically you need to refresh the page. Okay. Refresh the page, just copy these things and refresh the page. Perfect. Now go and create the build project. Done. So we have created a basic rough overline. Now, instead of running the start build, if I run the start build, what will happen? The code will be taken from GitHub repository and AWS code build will start building these things. You might ask me, Abhishek, you haven't used AWS code pipeline till now. Don't worry. I'll show you the use case of AWS code pipeline as well. But right now, what I've done is only configured AWS code build. And these stages I've configured in the code build spec file. Perfect. Now let's move ahead and let me explain you how to store the sensitive information. So for that, just search here for Systems Manager. Perfect. So search for Systems Manager, and in the Systems Manager, you will have an option called Parameter Store. We have a dedicated class for AWS Systems Manager where I'll explain you everything. And you need to create parameters like this. How I have created these things, I'll tell you in a minute. But I have created one for my Docker credentials username, one for my Docker credentials password, and one for my Docker registry URL. That is, I'm using docker.io. So how did I do this? Just click on create parameter. Let's say I'm creating this for Docker registry URL. So what I need to do is put something like this: my app, Docker credentials, followed by let's say Docker username. Okay. So you can put this in this way. The reason why I followed this format is it will be very easy to understand for which application that I have created and what kind of credentials is this and what is the username. In AWS parameter store, you will create in real-time organization, you will create lot of secrets, and sometimes you will forget which secret is for what. In this video, we are just doing for one service, so it is very easy. But when you have hundreds of services, you have Jenkins related passwords, you have code build related passwords, you have EKS related passwords, and there are 200 microservices. So it is important to follow a standard. So usually I follow this standard. That is, firstly, what is the name of the application? It can be payments, transaction, simple application, anything. Followed by, is it Docker credentials, Terraform credentials, Ansible credentials? Followed by, is it username, password, anything that you want to append. You can provide a description for better understanding later tomorrow. Even if you forget what is this, you can look at the description and understand. Then use standard and select secure string. You should select secure string only. And here, use the default encryption. We will cover what is KMS and all in future videos. Don't worry now. And here you can put the value. So in this case, I will not show you the Docker username, but what I can do you is, let's say I'm storing the Docker registry URL. Okay. Just for an example, let's say I'm storing this for something like Docker registry URL. Okay. So here you can put docker.io, right? So I have already created these things. So let me not do it again. So I have Docker registry URL in place. I have Docker username in place, and I have Docker password in place, right? I have all the three things that I have already created. Perfect. Now, when we move ahead, I'll show you how to use these ones in the AWS code build.spec.yaml that we are writing, build-spec.yaml that we are writing. So again, I hope you understood what is the reason why I have put this in this format. And when we use it, we will just call this specific parameter. Let's say I want to use this one in the build spec. I'll just call it as Docker underscore registry underscore URL. This will be called as Docker underscore credentials underscore username. I'll show you in a second. Now, if you go to this one, let's edit the build details. In the build details, let's edit the build spec.yaml file. We will complete this one right now. Let me uncomment environment. Let me uncomment parameter store because I stored the username and passwords in the parameter store. Now the key will be Docker underscore registry underscore username. Another key will be Docker. Sorry, there should not be any typos. So let me copy paste it. Here, this one is for password. Right? And then finally, the last one that I have is for Docker registry URL. Perfect. Now, what is the value for it? The value you need to copy it from here. Now, did you understand why did I put this in this format? Because it will replicate the things that I have created here. So I followed the same practice. You can technically change these things. You can put this anything as your wish, but it will be better if you try to put this as understandable as possible. So I copied the wrong one. Firstly, let's copy this one. Username would be my app Docker credentials username. Of course, you can change this one, but you cannot change this one because this is where the information is coming from. And then the next one would be my app Docker credentials password, and the final would be my app Docker registry URL. So in my case, I followed the variable creation using the format Docker registry URL, this one, and Docker registry password and Docker registry username. But you can follow any practice that you would like to. But make sure when you are changing these ones, you need to change them in the code that I'm writing here as well. So now what I'll do is I'll simply replace this one with Docker build -t followed by what I'm doing here, Docker registry URL, Docker registry username, and name of the application. Let me remove and write it for you. Usually when we are writing the Docker build command, what you do is you provide a tag for the build that you are creating. And how does the tag look like? Something like this, right? Docker.io followed by Abhishek FI. Let's say if this is my Docker registry name, followed by name of the application. So in this case, let me call it as sample Python Flask app, followed by the tag that you would like to. But instead of putting these things like this, instead of exposing your registry, exposing your username, what I've done is I am replacing it with the environment variables that we have just copied from parameter store, right? So I just replaced it with Docker registry URL, Docker registry username, simple Python Flask application, and the tag. And you can just copy this as is in the push statement as well. Perfect. Now we have the Docker build also completed. Docker push is also done. So now let's try to go and implement this Docker build or the entire continuous integration part with AWS code build. Till now I haven't integrated AWS code pipeline, so don't worry. Now update the code build spec. Now we will run the start build, and of course it will fail with a couple of errors, and I'll show you how to solve those errors as well. Firstly, click on the start build. You will notice that there will be an error. The first error that you will see will be with respect to the Docker credentials. One is you provided the credentials, but you did not grant this AWS code build access to the systems manager, right? So like I told you, you have attached it with a role. We are using a role here, but the role that we are using for this service, it does not have permissions to talk to this AWS systems manager. If it was a IAM user, we will go to IAM user and grant the permissions. But because this is a IAM service, we will go to IAM roles and grant the permissions. I'll show you that. Right. So, okay, one reason why you are not seeing that error is because I am using the IAM role that I already have in place, right? So what you need to do in your case, I'm sorry for that, because I already have created the IAM role, but doesn't matter. I'll show you with the role that I've created at the starting of this video. So just go to this role section, and in the role section, what was the role that we created? Code build service role Abhi. Just go there and click on add permissions. Attach policies, search for SSM, which stands for Systems Manager, and grant SSM full access or whatever access that you would like to. Because this is demo, you can grant full access and click on add permissions. So this is the only thing that you need to do additionally, apart from my demo. The reason is now I was using a role that was already created for my AWS code build. Technically that is okay. Now we are left with only one error. That is, it is saying there is no such file or directory requirements.txt. Okay, we have provided the path slightly wrong. If you look at the path, what is the path? You need to go to day 14, and inside day 14, you have simple Python app, and there you have requirements.txt. Now, what did we put here? Day 14 sim instead of simple Python app, I said it as sample Python app, right? Let me re-verify. Yeah, it is simple, but in the code file, I have written it as sample. So this is how you need to look into the errors and fix it. Errors will not be very difficult, right? So how you will fix it? Just again, go back to build projects, click on your build project, click on the build details, edit the build details, and here change it to simple. Even here, you need to change it to simple. Update the build spec, and let's rerun this. Start build. Now, because we are using the AWS code build, I have to manually run the build. When we complete the demo, I will integrate it with AWS code pipeline. So what will happen if you integrate it with AWS code pipeline? It will act as an orchestrator and invoke AWS code build. So then what happens is when someone makes change to your code commit or GitHub, it will call AWS code pipeline, and code pipeline will automatically call code build. So there will not be any manual intervention. But because we haven't integrated this one right now, I'm doing it manually. Perfect. Let's go here and wait for the build to complete. Okay, this time it passed that last stage. Now it is trying to build the Docker image. And there is one thing that you need to know. Docker image creation will fail because you have to grant one more permission for this specific thing that I'm going to show you. See what it said is you cannot execute the Docker command. Okay, when it tried to execute the Docker build, it failed, saying that it said Docker build requires exactly one argument. Okay, build an image with Docker file. Probably we also messed up with the Docker image related code. Let's go back and see what did we add. This is good learning, right? Whenever we face issues, we will learn things. So I think the Docker build command that I've added is wrong. Let us see. Go to sample build project, go to build details, go to edit option here, and let's see what is the Docker command that we have added. Docker build -t. Okay. So what did I do here? I said Docker build -t everything, but I forgot to add the dot here. Without dot, it does not understand which Docker file to build, right? So yeah, it's good to make errors, because if I make errors, only then you will understand that even I am doing it from scratch. Okay, just kidding. But when I do these errors, it will also help you in debugging the issues and fixing the issues. So I don't want to edit this part of the video, and I'll upload as is with errors that I am doing and how I am fixing these errors. Okay, now again, let's wait for the build. Okay. Now, what is the error? Yeah, cannot connect to the Docker daemon. So this is the final error that you should see. And this error can be easily fixed by granting additional permissions to the code build. So how do you do that? Go back to the project and click on the edit button, click on environment. Now, why did you run into this error? Because by default, AWS code build does not allow you to create Docker images on the build systems that it provides. All that you need to do is click on this override image option. And if you scroll down, you have a button called privileged. Just enable this one. I could have done this previously as well, but I wanted to show you because I'm very sure that everyone who is doing this might run into these issues. So I wanted to show you live. Now, if we do the start build, this time the image creation and the image push will be successful. So it will take another 2 minutes. And after 2 minutes, I'm pretty sure the image creation is done. We will move towards integration with AWS code pipeline, which will be our last stage. And then I'll show you by committing a code change to GitHub, how this entire thing will be automatically triggered. That will be end of our demo. But before that, let's see if this is getting done or not. Yeah, sometimes this might take more time depending upon the AWS region that you have selected, depending upon the load on that specific AWS region and the latency as well. So you can't do anything. You just need to wait. So the build is running. The pre-builds action are going on. And I don't know how many of you actually read the build logs. It is very, very useful to read the build logs. When you read the build logs, you will understand internally what is happening as well. Like internally how AWS is performing these stages, what are the things and all. Now, if you see, the Docker command is getting executed. Now the image is getting built. And after that, the image will also be pushed. You might ask me, Abhishek, why you did not use ECR, that is Elastic Container Registry, because I haven't covered that topic yet, so I did not pick that thing. And later, when we cover ECR, we will also get to that. Requested access to the resource is denied. Okay, no problem. We will try to see why the requested access is denied. Again, I might have added the wrong command. It will not be anything more than that. Build projects. So you do this kind of simple mistakes when you do CI/CD pipelines, right? Now, let's again go to the edit section. Docker push command. What did I say? So maybe I mentioned these things wrong. It should be docker.io followed by Docker registry username, simple Python Flask app followed by latest. I'm expecting this is something that I've added wrong. Let me see. Docker registry URL, Docker registry username, simple Python Flask app. Let me try with this once. Build spec. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I realized what is going wrong here. So we are doing the Docker build and Docker push, but we forgot one important command here, which I had to add. That is when we go to the build details, we forgot to add the credentials itself. We copied the credentials from parameter store here, but where did we actually authenticate? That means we missed the Docker login command, right? So you should also add the Docker login command, without which definitely your build will fail. So just use this command. You can copy this from the GitHub repository. What I'm doing technically is Docker login -u, Docker registry username, and Docker registry URL, passing the password using an echo statement. So this is a very simple Docker command that I'm using. So echo Docker registry password, pipe, pass the first output of the first command to the second one, where I'm doing Docker login -u, registry username, and password. So password is taken from here, right? So by adding this thing, now you should be able to authenticate. Let's try one more time. Build spec. Now I'm expecting this to the real final one where the entire thing will be built. Okay, fingers crossed. So don't worry, you don't have to repeat these steps. If you want to try, that is well and good. Or you can also copy the buildspec.yaml from my GitHub repository as well. But I would recommend you to do in the same way that I'm doing, so that if you run into errors, you will learn from the errors. So here I ran into errors and I tried to fix it multiple times. But finally, when you see this success, you will realize that all your hard work is useful, right? All the hard work that you have put in building this pipeline is now successful because the project is created. You have implemented the continuous integration using AWS code build. If you go to your Docker Hub now, just go to Docker Hub and go to your registry, whichever it is. In this case, we are using Docker Hub, and then move to your user namespace. So mine is Abhishek FI, and you will notice that if you go to your user namespace, you will find a sample Python application. Okay, let me do this and go to Abhishek FI like this. Perfect. See, this is the one that we just created, updated a minute ago. Abhishek FI simple Python application. And if you look at the tags, there will be only one tag called latest. Perfect. So this is how we implemented CI using AWS code build. Now the last step that is left is to integrate it with pipeline. Why you'll integrate it with pipeline? Because you don't want to do this manually. You want it to be invoked automatically, and that invocation will be done by AWS code pipeline whenever a code change is made to GitHub repository. So let's do that. Let's go to AWS code pipeline. So let's take another tab here, call it code pipeline. And in the code pipeline, create pipeline, name of the pipeline, sample Python app. You can either create a new service role. See, this is what I was saying. The service role should be automatically displayed. And then click on the next button. Source provider. What is your source provider? Provide GitHub version 2, not version 2, not version 1. And click on the connect to GitHub. Right here again, provide connection name, Python. I'm just providing random names. Connect to GitHub. Perfect. Click on the connect button. And now your connection is established to the GitHub. This is very important. The connection needs to be taken care because whenever there is a code change, right? Whenever you see a code change, AWS code commit or GitHub, whatever you are configuring as source, it has to send request to pipeline, and pipeline has to invoke this one. So that's why you need to establish this connection. Now provide the repository name, AWS DevOps 0 to hero. Provide the branch name, main. Now, what is the output format? Let's choose this one, same. You don't have to change anything. Build provider, of course, the code build project that we have just built. Sample Python Flask service. Do you want single build or batch of builds? For now, let's select the single build. What is your provider, right? Deployment provider. This will cover in the CD part. So that's why we can skip the deployment stage. Verify everything is correct and click on the create pipeline. So now your entire project is created, right? We have integrated GitHub with AWS code pipeline with code build, and now someone makes change to the GitHub repository, it will be triggered automatically. See, what is it saying? This is the entire code pipeline. This is the orchestrator, like I explained in you all in the last video. What code pipeline does is, firstly, there will be a source which can be GitHub, right? It got updated. In this case, the source repository is GitHub. And whenever someone makes change to the GitHub, code pipeline will invoke the build service. In this case, the build service is AWS code build. Wait for it to be updated, and then you can perform the final demo by making a code change to your repository. Of course, you cannot make a code change to my repository, right? So if you are using my repository, your demo will conclude here because you cannot practically make a change to my repository. Whereas if you are using your own repository, you can perform this final stage as well, where you can make a code change and verify if it is done. So let's wait for the code build to be updated. See, it is still in progress. Perfect. Now it took 2 minutes for me, so I'll edit that portion of 2 minutes. But anyways, you have to wait for 2 minutes till your build is added successfully. So now the entire pipeline is created, and tomorrow's video, when we will add one more stage, that is source, build, and deploy. So now let's do the final verification part, and let's submit a code change here. I can modify directly because this is my repository. Let me add a simple space here. Commit change. See, what did it say? Automatically, now this changed to in progress. And once this becomes done, this will change to in progress and you will see a new Docker image in your Docker registry, right? So now what is happening? The source is triggering the AWS code pipeline that got done. Now it is triggering the AWS code build. Perfect. And once this code build is also done, you can track the progress here. Click on the details button and you will see a job is getting run. See, the job is getting triggered automatically. That is the advantage of using AWS code pipeline. It acts as an orchestrator. It will automatically invoke the AWS code build or build service whenever there is a code change. Like, it will take a couple of minutes. Perfect. This is running fine. Docker image is getting created again. And once this is done, let me refresh and show you here that now the current image that is latest is updated 2 minutes ago. And you will see clearly here that 2 minutes ago. And now once the build is successful, you should see just now or 1 minute ago. Perfect. How is it going now? Perfect. It is successful. And let me refresh and see. Done. Pushed a few seconds ago. So here I conclude the demonstration of continuous integration. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's an end-to-end project and I will expect you to do this same thing from your end as well so that you can learn about the AWS build services. So we have demonstrated AWS code commit or GitHub with AWS code pipeline with AWS code build. So that way the continuous integration part is done. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you feel this video is helpful, please share with this video within the community. See you all in the next video. Take care. Bye.